All right, let's get some more analysis on this case and bring in Jessica Roth, a former New York federal prosecutor and professor at Cardozo Law. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
It's my pleasure.
So I want to ask you about the timing of this arrest. I mean, this is a year after Epstein was indicted and after the FBI had been tracking her for months. So what do you make of that?
The timing is certainly intriguing that here we are about a year after Epstein was charged and arrested. We're also about 2 weeks out from Jeffrey Berman having been ousted as U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York. So those are, important points of reference, I think. I'm not sure what to make of them yet. I think we're still going to be watching to see what else we learn. Some other sort of milestone events that I noted today, thinking about this and doing some research, include that in June, a judge approved a compensation fund for the victims of Jeffrey Epstein that was put together through litigation brought by the Attorney General in the Virgin Islands. And I think that fund went into effect June 15th. So that's interesting to think about. If I were still a prosecutor, I might take comfort from knowing that that fund is up and running to compensate the victims, regardless of the outcome of any criminal case that I might pursue now. So that's an interesting thing to think about, again, for context. And then, of course, there's the ongoing civil litigation involving Maxwell, including the ongoing release of documents from some of the civil litigation filed against her. A couple months back, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals had ruled that some of those documents had to be released to the public, and there's been this sort of steady release of those documents. There were filings even yesterday by lawyers for Maxwell opposing the release of some of those documents. And so it may be that prosecutors felt that their hand was forced a little bit here because perhaps they thought that the release of more damaging information from that litigation would have motivated Maxwell to flee, more so even than before.
And Maxwell's indictment covers a time period in the 90s, but Epstein's charges covered a much larger period. So is that significant?
Certainly, that is another thing that jumped out to me right away. Like, the time frame for the Maxwell indictment is 1994 to 1997. Whereas the time frame for the Epstein indictment is 2002 to 2005. And there's no reason, nothing we're aware of, to suggest that they parted ways between those two time periods. So I think that's quite interesting that the Southern District focused these charges on that earlier time frame. In the press conference today, Audrey Strauss, who's the acting U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York, characterized the Maxwell charges as a prequel to the Epstein charges. And in fact, they read just like that. We have exactly the same pattern of conduct just happening at an earlier point in time.
Just a prequel there. Okay. And this has been handled by your old office. How would you prosecute a case like this? And what kind of key facts do you need to establish?
Well, I mean, the most important evidence in this case is going to be the testimony of the victims. And certainly many of them are already on record accusing Maxwell of having been intimately involved in Jeffrey Epstein's crimes in the ways described in the indictment that was filed today, as having groomed them, been in communication with them to set up appointments, and even having been physically present for and participated in some of the sexual abuse. So the testimony of those victims will be critical, and I'd be working with those victims to be comfortable, make sure that they're comfortable, and we've thoroughly prepared their testimony. But then I'd be looking for corroboration, and there should be plenty of that here in the nature of documents. There were a lot of payments being made here, a lot of money moving around. There were plane trips taken for the victims, and in fact, that's part of the charges here, is that Maxwell engaged in the interstate transportation of minors for the purpose of criminal sexual acts. So there's going to be records of that travel. There should be phone records. And then, of course, other corroborating testimony of non-victims, maybe the pilots, other witnesses, housekeepers, people who would have had firsthand knowledge, if not direct, then circumstantial, about what was happening.
And given your history, I'm sure you've seen and heard it all. What kind of defense do you think that you might get from Maxwell?
Well, she's already accused the victims of lying. That's been her defense in the civil litigation that's been brought against her, saying that this just didn't happen. What's sort of interesting here is that two of the charges that were filed against Maxwell today were perjury charges, alleging that she lied under oath in 2016 and in a deposition in the context of that civil litigation when she effectively denied having participated in this criminal activity. So I would expect that the first line of attack is simply just a factual denial of her involvement, and perhaps suggesting that Jeffrey Epstein, who is now dead, was solely responsible. and not her.
All right, Jessica Roth, thank you so much. We really appreciate talking to you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.